Welcome to Breaking Frontiers. Ladies, let me ask you a question. Have you ever looked at a man you care about and wondered, why won't he just open up? Or maybe you felt frustrated, thinking he just doesn't feel things as deeply as you do. The truth is, men do have emotions, and they run just as deep as ours. But the way they process, express, and even hide those emotions is completely different. And if we don't understand this, it can lead to unnecessary heartbreak, misunderstandings, and even a sense of emotional disconnection. Today, we're going to dive into what every woman needs to know about men's emotions so you can build stronger, more fulfilling connections. Men feel deeply, but they express emotions differently. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of male psychology, and it's why so many relationships, so many deeply meaningful connections fall apart unnecessary. Women often assume that because a man isn't outwardly emotional, he must not have emotions, or worse, that he must not care. But this couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, in many cases, the men who seem the most emotionally reserved are the ones who feel things the most intensely. The problem is that men and women have fundamentally different ways of processing and displaying emotion. And if we don't take the time to understand this, we end up talking past each other. From the time they are boys, men are taught implicitly and explicitly that emotions are dangerous. Not all emotions, of course, but the ones that make them feel vulnerable: sadness, fear, uncertainty. These are the emotions they learn to suppress because showing them makes them appear weak. And weakness, they are told, is unacceptable. Instead, they are rewarded for displaying control, for keeping their emotions in check, for solving problems rather than dwelling on feelings. And so they grow into men who, rather than verbalizing their emotions the way women do, internalize them. Now, when you take that kind of upbringing, one that conditions men to hold it together no matter what, and you place that man in a relationship with a woman who is taught by contrast that emotional connection comes through talking things out, you create a dynamic that can be incredibly frustrating for both people. The woman naturally wants her partner to open up, to share what he's feeling, to express himself in a way that makes sense to her. But the man just as naturally experiences emotions not as something to be expressed, but as something to be managed. He doesn't necessarily see talking about emotions as a means to connection. He sees it as a sign that he's failing to deal with things on his own. This is where so much confusion comes in. A woman might ask what's wrong, and when he says nothing, she assumes he's shutting her out. But in his mind, he's not shutting her out. He's protecting her from the weight of his inner world. He's doing exactly what he's been trained to do: handle it. And often the more he loves her, the more reluctant he is to burden her with his struggles. But here's the thing: just because a man doesn't express emotions the same way a woman does, doesn't mean he isn't feeling them just as deeply. Deeply, they suffer. They feel fear, anxiety, sadness, loneliness. They experience deep love, profound heartbreak, and an overwhelming desire to be enough, to be worthy. But they often do it in silence because they don't know how to put those feelings into words, or because they've been conditioned to believe that doing so would only make things worse. And because they've been conditioned to believe that doing so would only make things worse. This is why women so often misinterpret male silence. They assume it means apathy, disinterest, or emotional detachment. But in many cases, silence is a man's way of processing, of wrestling with emotions in the only way he knows how. If a woman reacts to that silence with frustration, if she pressures him to talk before he's ready, or accuses him of being emotionally unavailable, it only reinforces his belief that expressing his emotions is dangerous. So what does he do? He shuts down even more, and suddenly you have a cycle where both people feel unseen and misunderstood. What men often do instead of talking is act. They show love through their actions, through their commitment, through the small everyday things they do that they hope will be recognized. A man who fixes something for you, who protects you in subtle ways, who remembers the things that matter to you. These are all expressions of emotion, just in a different language than words. When a man chooses to be with you, when he stays and works through life's challenges by your side, that is often his way of saying, I love you, I choose you. But if a woman only looks for love in verbal expressions of emotion, she may miss the ways he's already telling her how much he cares. Understanding this is crucial. It doesn't mean women should lower their emotional expectations, nor does it mean men shouldn't learn to communicate better, but it does mean we need to meet each other halfway. If you want a man to open up emotionally, you have to understand that pushing him won't work. He has to feel safe, not just safe from judgment, but safe in the knowledge that if he does open up, it won't be used against him later, that it won't make him seem less competent in your eyes, that his vulnerability won't lead to rejection. When a man does express emotion, whether it's frustration, sadness, or even anger, it's important to recognize that this may be him attempting to communicate in the only way he knows how. Instead of immediately reacting, try listening. Instead of assuming his silence means indifference, try trusting that he's processing. Instead of waiting for grand declarations of love, look for the small, consistent ways he shows he cares. And here's the truth. When a man does finally open up, when he trusts a woman enough to let her see the depth of his emotions, that's not something to take lightly. That's a man offering something incredibly rare, something he's likely hidden from most people his entire life. If that moment is met with criticism, dismissal, or frustration, he will shut down again, and it may take a very long time for him to trust enough to open up again. So what do? You create an environment where he wants to share. You listen when he does, without immediately trying to fix or correct. You recognize his emotions in his actions, not just his words. And most importantly, you understand that just because a man's emotions don't look like yours doesn't mean they aren't there, because they are. They always have been. The question is whether you see them. Silence doesn't mean he doesn't care. It's often his way of processing. This is something that so many people fail to understand, and the consequences of that misunderstanding can be devastating for relationships. Women often expect men to process emotions the way they do, by talking things out, by expressing every thought and feeling in real time. When that doesn't happen, when a man withdraws instead, the assumption is that he must not care, that he's emotionally unavailable, that he simply doesn't feel as deeply as she does. But that assumption is wrong. Men do feel. They feel just as deeply as women, sometimes even more deeply. But the way they handle those emotions is fundamentally different. A woman will often process her emotions through conversation, sorting through what she feels by verbalizing it, connecting with others, gaining clarity as she speaks. A man, on the other hand, is much more likely to process internally, turning things over in his mind, trying to find a solution before he ever says a word about what's bothering him. And this isn't just social conditioning, it's biological. Studies have shown that men and women's brains handle stress differently. When a woman experiences emotional distress, the areas of her brain associated with communication and emotional regulation light up. She is by nature inclined to talk through what she's feeling. A man's brain, on the other hand, shifts into problem-solving mode. His instinct is to fix whatever is causing distress, and if he can't fix it, he withdraws to process it alone. Now imagine how this plays out in a relationship. A woman senses that something is wrong with her partner. She sees him withdrawing, becoming quiet, retreating into himself. Her immediate instinct is to ask what's wrong. She wants to help, to connect, to support him. But when he responds with nothing or I'm fine, she feels shut out. And the more he remains silent, the more she assumes the worst, that he doesn't trust her, that he doesn't care enough to share, that he isn't invested in the relationship the way she is. But what if that isn't what's happening? What if instead of shutting her out, he's actually trying to protect her from the weight of his thoughts? What if in his mind, talking about his problems before he's figured them out makes him feel incompetent, weak, or burdensome? What if silence for him isn't indifference, but an act of responsibility? His way of ensuring that when he does speak, he has something worthwhile to say. See, men don't like speaking without purpose. They don't like sitting in uncertainty, verbalizing emotions they haven't fully worked through yet. That's uncomfortable for them. And more than that, it makes them feel ineffective. A man's self-worth is often tied to his ability to handle challenges, to be strong, to figure things out. When he's struggling, he doesn't necessarily want to share that struggle. He wants to conquer it. And so he retreats, not because he doesn't care, but because he cares so much that he doesn't want to say or do the wrong thing. But here's the problem. If a woman interprets that silence as a sign that he doesn't care, she often reacts in a way that reinforces his need to withdraw. She may get frustrated, push for answers, accuse him of shutting her out. She may assume his lack of verbal expression means a lack of emotional depth. And when she does that, she unknowingly creates the exact situation she fears, because now he really doesn't feel safe opening up. He learns that if he speaks before he's ready, he's going to be met with pressure, criticism, or misunderstanding. So he pulls back even further. And what happens then? A cycle begins. The more he withdraws, the more she feels neglected. The more she pushes for connection, the more he feels overwhelmed. Neither person is wrong, but neither understands the other either. And slowly, without even realizing it, they start to drift apart. Not because they don't love each other, but because they don't understand how the other experiences emotion. So, what's the solution? How do you bridge that gap? The first step is to stop assuming silence means a lack of emotion. It doesn't. In many cases, a silent man is a man who is wrestling with something deeply. Instead of demanding that he talk before he's ready, create an environment where he wants to talk when the time comes. That means resisting the urge to fix his emotional state for him. That means allowing him the space to process things without assuming the worst. That means trusting that just because he isn't speaking now doesn't mean he won't speak later. And when he does open up, no matter how small the moment, recognize it for what it is, an act of vulnerability, a break in the armor he's spent his whole life constructing. Meet that moment with understanding, not frustration. Because if a man feels safe in his silence, he will eventually find his words. But if he feels like his emotions are only valid when they're expressed the way you want them to be, he'll learn that it's easier to just keep them to himself. This is where so many relationships fail, not because the love isn't there, but because the understanding isn't. Men and women experience emotion differently. And if we don't take the time to truly understand those differences, we will always feel disconnected, even when we care deeply. A man's silence is not a rejection. It's not indifference. It's not a lack of emotion. In many cases, it's the opposite. It's the weight of too much emotion held back by years of conditioning that told him expressing it the wrong way would cost him everything. If we want stronger relationships, if we want deeper emotional intimacy, we have to stop forcing men to process emotions our way and start recognizing the way they naturally do. Because when a man does speak, when he does trust you enough to let you in, that moment is something profound. That moment is something earned. Men crave respect as much as women crave love. This is one of those uncomfortable truths that, when ignored, leads to endless cycles of frustration in relationships. And the reason it's uncomfortable is that it challenges a fundamental assumption many women have, that love is the ultimate currency of connection. That if a woman loves a man enough, if she nurtures him, supports him, expresses her affection, then surely he should feel fulfilled. But this is where the disconnect happens, because while love matters deeply to men, it is not the thing that makes them feel valued. It is not the thing that makes them feel seen. What men crave at the core of their being is respect. And if they don't feel respected, no amount of love will make up for it. Now, this isn't to say that men don't need love. Of course they do. But men experience love through respect. A woman might say, I love you, but if her tone is dismissive, if her words are critical, if she undermines his decisions or belittles his efforts, that love doesn't land the way she intends. To a man, how he is spoken to, how he is regarded, how his contributions are acknowledged, those things define the quality of the relationship. And this isn't just a matter of preference. It's biological. A man's psychology is built around his ability to provide, to contribute, to stand strong in the face of adversity. When a man feels respected, he feels capable. He feels like he matters. He feels like the work he's doing, whether it's in his career, in his family, or in the small everyday things, is recognized. But when he feels disrespected, when he feels dismissed or undervalued, he begins to withdraw. Not because he wants to, but because he sees no other choice. Because without respect, he feels irrelevant. This is where relationships often start to erode. A woman might criticize something small, how he handled a situation, how he made a decision, how he responded in a moment of stress, and she might think it's harmless. She might think, I'm just trying to help him be better. I'm just being honest. But to a man, criticism, especially in the form of contempt, lands differently. It doesn't just feel like an attack on his behavior, it feels like an attack on him, because men don't separate who they are from what they do the way women do. A woman might say, I love you, I just don't like the way you do things sometimes. But a man hears, I don't respect you. And when a man doesn't feel respected, he checks out. He might still be there, physically present, going through the motions, but emotionally, he starts to disengage. He becomes less expressive, less involved, less willing to try. And this is where so many women get confused. They think, why isn't he affectionate anymore? Why doesn't he talk to me like he used to? Why does he seem so distant? And the answer, more often than not, is that he doesn't feel safe. Not safe in the way women think of safety, emotional security, comfort, warmth, but safe in the sense that he knows his efforts are appreciated, that he is valued, that he is enough. Because here's something that isn't talked about enough. Men live with a constant gnawing fear that they aren't enough, that they won't measure up, that no matter how hard they try, it will never be good enough. And when that fear is confirmed, when the woman they love looks at them with disappointment, when their best efforts are met with criticism, when they feel like nothing they do is ever quite right, they start to retreat into themselves, not because they don't care, but because they feel powerless. So what does respect look like to a man? It's not about blind obedience or suppressing your own needs. It's not about stroking his ego just for the sake of it. Respect is trusting him. It's acknowledging his efforts. It's recognizing what he does right instead of always pointing out what he does wrong. It's choosing words that build him up instead of tearing him down. It's giving him the space to figure things out without stepping in and taking over. And most importantly, respect is believing in him, because if a man feels that the person he loves doesn't believe in him, if he feels that no matter what he does, it won't be good enough, then he will eventually stop trying, not out of anger, not out of laziness, but because men are not wired to invest where they feel useless. This is where so many relationships fall apart, not in explosive fights or betrayals, but in the slow erosion of respect, in the way a woman's tone shifts from admiration to criticism, in the way her eyes go from seeing him to judging him, in the way her words go from "you can do this" to "why do you always mess this up?" And once a man feels like he's lost that respect, getting it back is no small task, because here's the truth. When a man feels respected, he will walk through fire for the woman he loves. He will fight, he will sacrifice, he will give everything he has. But when he feels disrespected, when he feels like he's just another problem to be managed, another source of disappointment, another project to be fixed, he will start to detach. He will go silent. He will lose his fire. And once a man loses his fire, bringing it back is far harder than keeping it alive in the first place. So many women spend their energy trying to get more love from their men, more affection, more attention, more emotional engagement, without realizing that if they simply gave more respect, they would naturally receive all of those things in return. Because when a man feels respected, when he feels seen for who he is rather than constantly critiqued for what he isn't, his heart opens. He wants to be affectionate. He wants to be emotionally available. He wants to give more. Not because he's being pressured to, but because he feels valued. And when a man feels valued, when he knows deep in his bones that he is enough in the eyes of the woman he loves, there is nothing he won't do to make her happy. A man shows love through his actions, not just his words. This is something that a lot of people fail to grasp, and because of that, they miss what's right in front of them. Women in particular often look for love in verbal affirmations, in grand declarations, in deep and meaningful conversations. And when they don't get that, when a man doesn't say "I love you" in the way they expect, they assume he must not feel it. But that's a mistake, a serious one, because it ignores the reality of how men express love. Men aren't naturally wired to be verbal processors the way women are. A woman can talk about her emotions through her emotions, sorting them out as she goes. A man, on the other hand, is far more likely to experience emotion as something that needs to be acted upon. To him, love isn't just a feeling, it's a responsibility, a duty, a commitment to showing up. It's what he does, not just what he says. And this is something that has been true for thousands of years. Historically, men didn't express love through poetry or whispered affections. They expressed it by providing by protecting, by being there, day in and day out, ensuring the survival and well-being of those they loved. A man's love was demonstrated in his actions, in his consistency, in the things he built and maintained for his family. And that instinct, that deep ancient drive to do rather than just say, hasn't disappeared. It's still there in modern relationships, shaping how men show love. When a man works long hours to provide, when he fixes something around the house without being asked, when he goes out of his way to make sure you're safe, when he shows up even when it's inconvenient, that's love. That's his way of saying you matter. You are important to me. I am here for you. But here's the problem. If a woman doesn't recognize these actions for what they are, she can end up feeling unloved, even when she's deeply loved. She might say, "He never tells me how he feels. He never expresses his emotions. He never says, 'I love you' the way I want him to." And in her mind, that means he must not really love her. Meanwhile, in his mind, he's showing love constantly in ways that make perfect sense to him. And that's where the miscommunication happens. Because if she doesn't see his actions as love, if she dismisses them, ignores them, or takes them for granted, he starts to feel like nothing he does is enough. And when a man feels like his efforts aren't seen, when he feels like his way of expressing love isn't working, he starts to withdraw. Not because he doesn't care, but because he's exhausted, because he doesn't know how to love in a way that will actually be recognized. This is where so many relationships start to break down, not because the love isn't there, but because it's not being translated properly. A woman might be waiting for words when what she should be watching for is action. She might be longing for emotional conversations when what she should be appreciating is the way he consistently shows up. And this isn't to say that men can't express love verbally. Of course they can, and some men do. But for many, words don't come easily. Talking about emotions isn't just uncomfortable for them. It feels unnatural. It feels like something they shouldn't have to do, because in their minds, love isn't something you just talk about. Love is proven. Love is demonstrated. Love is lived. And here's something important. The more a man's actions are appreciated, the more likely he is to open up emotionally. If he feels like his efforts are seen, if he feels valued for what he does, then he becomes more comfortable expressing love in other ways too. But if he feels like nothing he does is ever enough, if he feels like his love is only valid when it looks a certain way, he'll shut down, he'll stop trying. Not because he doesn't love, but because he feels like his love isn't working. So what does this mean? It means that if you want to understand whether a man loves you, don't just listen to his words, watch his actions. Look at the way he prioritizes you. Look at the way he chooses you every single day. Look at the things he does that make your life easier, that make you feel secure, that show you he's invested. Because if a man loves you, you will see it, you will feel it in the consistency of his actions. And if you want him to express love more verbally, start by acknowledging what he's already doing. Start by recognizing his current expressions of love instead of just focusing on the ways he falls short. Because when a man feels seen, when he feels like his love is actually landing, he opens up more. He starts to express more. He wants to connect in new ways because he feels safe doing so. But if he constantly hears, "You don't love me the way I want to be loved," without any recognition of what he's already doing, then eventually he stops trying, not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of sheer exhaustion, because men don't want to fail in love. They don't want to feel like no matter what they do, it's never quite enough. They want to make the woman they love happy, but they need to feel like their love is working. This is where relationships thrive or fall apart. Not in whether or not a man feels love, but in whether or not his way of showing love is understood and appreciated. Because a man who feels valued, a man who feels like his love is seen, is a man who will give more. But a man who feels like nothing he does is ever quite right will eventually stop trying at all. And not because he doesn't love, but because he doesn't know how to make his love matter. The key to a healthy relationship isn't forcing men to communicate like women. It's understanding how they communicate naturally. When you approach a man with patience, respect, and a sense of emotional safety, he'll feel more comfortable letting you into his world. And when a man truly opens up to you, the bond you create is unbreakable. Now, I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on men's emotions? Have you experienced this in your relationships? Drop a comment below and let's start a conversation. And if you found this speech helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support means everything. Also, let me know what topics you want me to cover next. See you in the next one.